au.
Welcome back to Lunchtime Agenda. Joining me now on my panel of politicians is Labor MP Tim Watts and Liberal MP Tony Smith. Now, Tony, first to you, it appears from the ambition that Barack Obama has said overnight that the world has moved. Is it time that this parliament perhaps has a rethink?
Well, we were very clear before the last election what our policy was. That was to abolish the carbon tax and to pursue direct action which will reduce our emissions by 5% on 2000 levels by 2020. Now, that's a bipartisan target. Our great difference
Lower end of the target.
Well, it's a bipartisan target. I mean, I think it's still a bipartisan target, isn't it, Tim? And it's something we took to the Australian people. Now, we've been very clear about that. We're focused on the here and now, and we're focused on abolishing that carbon tax as soon as we can and implementing direct action.
And Tim Watts, overnight what we did see from Barack Obama is somewhat of an endorsement of direct action.
Oh, look, I'd reject that. What President Obama has done is he said, we're going to set a binding 30% reduction target by 2030, and states, you go away and work out how you can best achieve this result.
It's not an endorsement of an emissions trading scheme.
Well, it may well be. I mean, many states, as they're already pursuing in the United States, are pursuing emissions trading systems. But we should be very clear that what President Obama's done is he set a binding target. That's not the case with the current government's policy. They've set a 5% target, but if the set of magic beans that the government buys with their direct action policy doesn't achieve a 5% target, we're back to square one. It's not the government's problem, according to Tony Abbott.
Kevin Rudd overpromised and underdelivered, you'd have to say, when we came to the Copenhagen conference. Since then, there's been almost a growing apathy towards action on climate change. Why do you think that is?
Oh, look, I reject that. I mean, and clearly there was a lot of momentum behind strong, decisive action against climate change in 2007. There are a lot of global factors contributing to that. Clearly the need hasn't reduced since then, though. Certainly amongst my caucus and my branch members. But you'd
admit that the global action on it has somewhat reduced since that time?
No, absolutely not. In fact, quite the contrary. Action has substantially increased, particularly in China, the United States, our European colleagues. In fact, our G20 colleagues are pushing for this to be added to the agenda of G20. Unfortunately, the current chair of the G20, Australia, is resisting these issues. It's just another area where Australia's being left behind the rest of the world.
And Tony Smith, on climate action, Tony Abbott always said that once the rest of the world moves, Australia will move. Isn't this quite a big shift from Barack Obama?
Well, I think you've got to see it in context. I mean, I'm interested in Tim's remarks. It sounds like he's changing policy, but I'll come back to that. But as I said, see it in context. A couple of points. The points you made earlier in your interview with your first guest, there are a lot of elements that are like direct action. Direct action has an emissions reduction fund at its centre to clean up power stations. We want to clean them up rather than close them. And it's one announcement. Now, you both mentioned Copenhagen. A lot was said before Copenhagen. A lot was said in the lead up to Copenhagen.
And then there's Paris next year.
And there's a long way to go. There'll be lots of conversations, but our focus is...
But would you be happy to see the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, take your plan as is to the table? Compared with the Obama plan, it's far less ambitious. Will that be a little bit embarrassing, do you think?
Not at all. We said we would have a more effective means of dealing with climate change. We've had that policy for a long period of time. We took it to the election. It's been our policy for some years now, and our aim is to legislate it and to start making a difference now.
Okay, I quickly just want to ask you both about natural gas. IPART says that as of July 1, gas prices will go up 17%, largely due to the massive export market. Tony Smith, first to you, is this something that the government could address here and now?
I think you've got to be very careful when you're dealing with long investments that you've had in this space, and in my understanding, limited though it is, Laura, on these matters, is there'd be numbers of contracts in place. So I haven't seen the detail of what's there, but I heard you make reference to it in your earlier interview. That's the...
Tim Watts, long or short term, should that be addressed?
Oh, look, natural gas will clearly play a significant role in reducing our carbon emissions. Any further interventions in that space is not something I'd really go into.
Okay, Peter Costello, just in the last 2 hours, has said that he sees many jobs being created in the service sector over the next couple of years, and that if it were him, he would look at addressing that and addressing penalty rates at Sunday loadings. Tim, what's first to you? Is this a conversation, this is a conversation, I should say, that many are crying out for? Is it one that we should have in this building?
Look, we've seen a bit of squabbling inside the Liberal Party family in recent days, but the one thing that they're all lock solid, roll gold on the one team about is that every member of the Liberal Party thinks that you earn too much money. That's their message to the Australian people. They want to take your penalty rates, they want to take your weekend pay. The Labor Party's message is you don't go about improving productivity in this nation by slashing wages.
Isn't this about balance and boosting productivity? It's been declining for between 7 and 8 years.
We've got a very good balance at the moment. As I say, you don't go about improving productivity by slashing people's wages. Australian people aren't silly. They know that they won't work more efficiently and they won't work harder for less money.
Tony Smith, a good suggestion from your former boss?
Well, look, the point we've made on penalty rates is there's the Fair Work Commission that can deal with these matters if businesses go there. And in fact, the restaurant and catering industry did just that for restaurants and cafes, and the independent umpire considered all the facts, determined that in fact there was a link between the current penalty rates and employment in those industries, and brought down a judgment that brought down some change. And it did reduce those rates for the very junior employees. Now, you've got to get a balance right, as you said here. It's absolutely critical. I mean, if you've got restaurants and cafes in high tourist areas, as they found, being closed on weekends, or the owners working those shifts, and as my colleague Dan Teen has pointed out, young people being denied a job when youth unemployment's high. Balance is important, and that's why we've said...
Does it need to go further? Maybe, perhaps not in the short term, but, you know, in the next couple of years.
We've said Fair Work's the right place, and they've got that capacity, and the stories you're seeing...
Them on, though, aren't you, Tony?
The stories you're seeing today... Well, hang on. Look, if you're elected, let me ask you this. Are you going to overturn the Fair Work decision on restaurants?
No, but we're not going to be cheering along like the Liberal Party is at the moment. The Liberal Party desperately wants the Fair Work Commission to take away...
Do you respect that independent decision made in the restaurant catering
Absolutely, and that's
sector?
why I'm not commentating on that result, unlike many members of the Liberal Party.
Well, you're allowed to talk about the result. You're a member of Parliament.
There's a coordinated campaign going on from Liberal MPs to take away penalty rates. They're building to act on this in the future.
But what's the argument for it? I mean, there's businesses that are crying out for them at least to be looked at and not abolished altogether, but perhaps made less generous. Would you even
we have a fair system to look at that at the moment.
Okay. I want to move on to the Medicare co-payment. Tony Smith, Joe Hockey has warned today that if this doesn't pass through the Senate, that down the track it will create a two-tiered system. You obviously agree with that?
Well, I do, and whenever in the health space we've had this sort of argument in the past, as Labor put forward in the 1990s, the 1990 budget, Paul Keating upped the co-payment on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme and said in his budget speech that the choice was a sustainable system or no system at all. Now, that was when Labor were prepared to confront these issues, and of course, you know, the only co-payment that's been legislated is, you know, the Bob Hawke co-payment with Brian Howe as Health Minister, and they were led there by the review led by Jenny Macklin. Now, Labor know this, but of course will be populist in opposition, and that's all we've seen since Budget Day.
Tim Watts, is it too politically difficult? Is that the way you see it? Do you see this as hitting Labor's core base? That's not a group of voters that you want to upset, or is this a fundamental ideological view that you have?
Oh, look, there's no doubt that Australians deeply treasure Medicare. It's one of our great institutions, and they get very stroppy when politicians try and destroy it.
Really destroy that, though?
Absolutely, it undermines a fundamental premise of Medicare. It's universal, affordable access. Now, this $7 co-payment, you know, you listen in Question Time and you hear the health minister say, oh, no one will be disincentivised from going to the doctor. And then you hear Joe Hockey say...
Obviously there's going to be some tinkering in this area, because as it is, it will not get through the Senate. Will you look at some of the ideas that are no doubt thrown around over the next couple of weeks? And what if it was means tested, for example?
Well, the proposal has been put to us to date. We will fight absolutely. We'll oppose that in the Senate. Tony Abbott has said there'll be no surrender on this policy. So the tinkering that you're suggesting, we haven't heard any bit of that from the Liberal Party so far.
Okay, as of tomorrow, Tony Abbott will be overseas. He's heading to Indonesia first. Now, there has been a relationship in the deep freeze, you might say. Do you see this as the first step to repairing that relationship with Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and is a day trip enough to do that?
Well, the point I'd make is we've got a very close relationship with Indonesia, and the Prime Minister has a close relationship with the President. So I think stopping there is a good thing to do. I don't concede that the relationship, is in a bad way. Of course, there are issues of tension on the policy front, but I think they've got
a policy front. It's been revealed in estimates that 7 exercise programs, coordinated programs between the two countries have been postponed since the election. That's, solid evidence that has affected. The relationship, the policy that.
I always want to have a look at what's actually said in estimates, because I find Senate estimates to be a misrepresentation factory in my experience.
Okay, Tim, what's your reaction?
Look, the relationship with Indonesia is clearly crucial for Australia. It's one of our most important relationships, and the Labor Party's been very clear for some time now that we fully support the government's initiatives to repair that relationship. We don't want to politicise this at all. It's a priority, and the government has our full support in that respect.
Now, Clive Palmer has made it very clear that he's not getting along very well with Tony Abbott or the government at all at this point. He has made some pretty nasty comments towards Peter Credlin. Today he has expressed some regret making those comments. But do you think he should apologise to Peter Credlin? Do you think they were sexist remarks? What's your reaction?
I think they were grubby, they were wrong, and he should apologise. I note he's refusing to apologise. But the other point I'd make, Laura, is other members of Parliament should condemn these remarks. Christopher Pyne outlined all the areas where he was wrong and inappropriate, and I've seen a few members of the Labor Party condemn the remarks today as I've had Sky on, and I think that's good, but I want to see more do that, because it's completely unacceptable.
And Tim Watts, you condemned Clive Palmer's comments this morning on the doors of Parliament, but some of your colleagues didn't. Terry Butler, for one, refused to call Clive Palmer out on these remarks. Are you disappointed by that?
Oh, look, I wasn't there. I didn't see Terry's comments, but I know Terry very well. I know that her position on issues like this is pretty unambiguous. So, look, I don't know what she said, but I know her as an individual, and I know that she's rock solid on these issues. And as Tony said, Clive Palmer's comments were wrong and inappropriate. Peter Credlin shouldn't have to put up with this kind of treatment. And not only that, it's an unwelcome distraction from a piece of legislation that has, plenty to attack on the substance, as I'm sure that Tony may agree.
Tony Smith, where we see Clive Palmer and his public comments sledging Tony Abbott, sledging the government, do you see some ominous clouds ahead when it comes to negotiating some key parts of this budget?
Well, look, we're just getting on with the job of legislating the budget. We're not going to be commentators on it. People will make a judgment about Clive Palmer's conduct and how he conducts himself in public debates, and I've made my position clear on what he's said in the last 24 hours, but we can't avoid the difficult decisions in this budget. We know they're difficult, we know they're unpopular, but there hasn't been an alternative put forward.
Tony Abbott said in Party Room today, we've established in the minds of the electorate warm hearts, clear heads and strong minds. The polls wouldn't indicate that, though. Would you agree?
Well, look, obviously with the budget, it's very unpopular in some parts, of course, and there are difficult decisions. We don't shy away from those. But what's the alternative from the opposition? Where do they want the deficit to be? I mean, this is a good question for you, Tim. If you don't like the measures that are being put forward, what are your alternatives? Or don't you have any? Or do you want to just keep running up debt? Now, we have to confront these issues on behalf of the Australian people. Of course we do. And we're doing that, and we're doing it to be responsible, and we're doing it to fix the mess.
Tim, what's your response?
Well, when Labor was in government, we introduced many billions of dollars worth of long-term savings to the budget. like the previous opposition, we won't be revealing detailed election policies for an election that's not due for 2 years' time just yet. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander in that respect.
Between now and the next election.
There's a long time to go between now and the election.
And now you're voting against some of your own savings you put forward at the last election.
We're voting against some very unfair budget measures that Tony Abbott's trying to introduce
well, you can continue this debate in question time.
I better get down there.
Thank you, Tim Watts, Tony Smith. Thank you for joining me on Lunchtime Agenda.